My in-laws said I was selfish for wanting to wait 3 years to have children so they could be young grandparents and started a family war. I, 27F, had been with my fiancé Mike, 29M, for 4 years, and we got engaged 6 months ago. We were planning a small wedding ceremony next spring, and everything was going well until last month when Mike's parents started obsessing over when we would give them grandchildren. It began innocently enough with a few comments at Sunday dinners about how they were looking forward to becoming grandparents, but quickly escalated into something I never imagined would happen. For some context, I just received a major promotion that I've been working toward for 3 years. It's my dream job that involves leading international marketing campaigns for a major tech company, which means I'll need to travel to our satellite offices in Europe and Asia several times a year. The salary bump is significant, and I'm beyond excited about this opportunity. Mike is equally thrilled about starting his medical residency next month in neurosurgery, which he's been working toward since we met. We've always been supportive of each other's career goals and had already discussed waiting 3 to 4 years before trying for kids, so we could establish ourselves professionally and be financially secure. I thought Mike's parents, Linda and Tom, understood this. They seemed supportive when we first told them about my promotion and Mike's residency match. But everything changed when we attended a family barbecue at their house 3 weeks ago. Linda cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with the salad and started asking detailed questions about my fertility. She wanted to know if I had my eggs checked, if I was aware of how fertility declines after 30, and if I considered freezing my eggs since I was putting off motherhood for my career. I was completely blindsided and uncomfortable but tried to politely explain that Mike and I had a timeline we were comfortable with. Throughout the barbecue, Linda kept making more comments, asking if I'd hold the neighbor's baby, pointing out how natural I looked with a child in my arms, and telling everyone how she had Mike when she was only 24. Tom joined in too, talking about how being older parents made everything harder and how they were worried they'd be too old to enjoy their grandchildren if we waited much longer. It was embarrassing and intrusive, but I kept my cool for Mike's sake. The following week, a package arrived at our apartment. Inside were baby clothes, several books about pregnancy and child-rearing, and a handwritten note from Linda saying she couldn't wait to see our little one in these. Mike called his mom to tell her this was inappropriate, but she laughed it off as just being excited. Then she started texting me links to articles about career women regretting waiting too long and suggesting that I should talk to my boss about reconsidering the promotion since it would make starting a family so much harder. The situation reached a breaking point last weekend. We were invited to dinner at Mike's parents' house, just the 4 of us. When we arrived, Linda immediately handed me a glass of water instead of the wine everyone else was having, saying she didn't want to risk anything just in case. Before I could even respond, she proudly announced that she'd taken the liberty of scheduling me an appointment at a fertility clinic for next Tuesday. She had a business card ready and everything. I was shocked into silence until Mike asked what she was talking about. Linda explained that she'd told the clinic I was concerned about my fertility and wanted a complete workup before trying to conceive. She'd given them my full name, birth date, and even my insurance information, which she'd somehow obtained from Tom's company files. He works in HR at the company where Mike gets his health insurance as a dependent. I felt violated and angry but still tried to stay calm. During dinner, Linda continued pushing the subject, talking about how she'd already started converting their home office into a nursery for when they babysit. When I firmly stated that we weren't planning on having children for at least 3 years, the mood at the table instantly changed. Linda's face fell, and Tom put down his fork with a loud clank. Linda started crying, saying I was denying her grandchildren and being selfish, that I didn't understand how important family was, and that my career wouldn't keep me warm at night when I was old. Tom was even worse, saying I was clearly too career-focused to be a proper wife and mother, and that Mike should reconsider marrying someone with such different values. He suggested that my own parents must have failed at teaching me what really matters in life, which was especially hurtful since my mom died when I was in college, and my dad has always been my biggest supporter. Mike finally snapped and told his parents they were being completely inappropriate. He reminded them that our reproductive choices were none of their business, and that we had always planned to have children when the time was right for us. Linda responded by saying he was brainwashed, that I was controlling him, and that he'd always wanted to be a young father, which isn't true at all. The dinner devolved into a shouting match, with Linda crying and Tom lecturing us about family obligations. We ended up leaving early, with Linda yelling after us that we'd regret not listening to her wisdom. The next day, I called my Aunt Diane for advice. She's always been like a second mother to me since my mom passed, and she doesn't hold back her opinions. She told me I shouldn't tolerate this treatment and that Mike and I needed to set firm boundaries immediately. After talking with Mike, we decided I would limit contact with his family until they could respect our choices. Mike supported me but was clearly stressed about the situation, torn between standing up for our decisions and keeping peace with his family. Over the next few days, Linda called Mike constantly, texted me more fertility articles, and even showed up at our apartment unannounced with more baby items. She cornered me while Mike was at work, crying about how I was tearing apart their family and suggesting that if I really loved Mike, I would want to give him children right away. I finally lost my patience and told her that if she couldn't respect our boundaries now, she wouldn't be welcome in our future children's lives at all. She left in tears, and Tom called shortly after to say I had gone too far. Mike is fully on my side but stressed about the whole situation. He agrees his parents are being ridiculous but feels guilty about the conflict. I don't think I should have to apologize for wanting to establish my career before having children, but I'm wondering if I went too far by suggesting they wouldn't be part of our future kids' lives. Linda has been telling everyone in their family that I'm keeping Mike from having the family he wants, and some of his relatives have been messaging him asking what's going on. I love Mike and I want a future with him, including children when we're ready. But I'm not willing to give up my career or rush into parenthood to satisfy his parents' timeline. Am I the asshole for putting my foot down and limiting contact until they respect our choices? Edit. Thank you everyone for your support and advice. Mike and I are reading all your comments together. To clarify a few things, yes, Mike has been standing up to his parents, but they don't seem to listen to him either. And no, I didn't actually ban them from our future children's lives forever, I was just trying to make a point after weeks of harassment. We're going to try having a conversation with them again to set clear boundaries. Update: when it's been a little over 2 weeks since I posted, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their support and advice. It really helped me feel less crazy about the whole situation. After reading many of your suggestions, Mike and I decided to try one more time to have a calm, mature conversation with his parents. We texted Linda and Tom requesting to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our apartment and their house. We were very specific that we wanted to meet just the four of us to discuss boundaries and moving forward in a healthier way. They agreed, and we felt cautiously optimistic. When we arrived at the cafe, my heart sank immediately. Linda and Tom weren't alone. They had brought Mike's grandmother Eleanor, his two aunts Barbara and Susan, and his sister Jen. It was clearly a planned ambush. They had pushed together several tables and were already seated with coffee and pastries like this was a casual family gathering. Mike squeezed my hand and whispered that we could leave, but I decided we might as well face everyone at once. As soon as we sat down, Linda pulled out a folder. Inside was a meticulously crafted family planning timeline that she had printed for everyone at the table. It included projected due dates for our first 3 children, suggested baby names, all named after Mike's relatives, naturally, and even a detailed plan for how my career should accommodate these babies. According to her schedule, I should be pregnant within 3 months of our wedding and take at least 2 years off work after each child. Mike immediately objected, asking why they had brought other family members when we specifically asked for a private conversation. Linda's eyes welled up with tears as she claimed she needed moral support because I was turning her son against his family. Eleanor, Mike's 78-year-old grandmother, patted Linda's hand and told me that a woman's purpose in life is motherhood and everything else is secondary. She said that in her day, women didn't put off children for selfish reasons like careers. I tried to remain calm and explain that both Mike and I wanted children eventually, but we had professional commitments that made waiting a few years the responsible choice. I mentioned my contractual obligations to my company and Mike's intense residency schedule, emphasizing that we wanted to be present, engaged parents when the time came. Tom dismissed this entirely, saying things like contracts can be broken for family and that plenty of women manage to have babies during their husbands' residencies. He suggested that my promotion was actually a sign I was too focused on myself and not enough on my future family. Barbara and Susan nodded along, adding that they had both worked while raising children and it wasn't that difficult if you had the right priorities. Mike's sister Jen, who I actually used to get along with quite well, suggested what she called a compromise. She proposed that we try for children immediately after the wedding, but I could continue working reduced hours from home. When I pointed out that my position required travel and couldn't be done remotely, she said I should have thought about that before accepting the promotion. The conversation went nowhere. Every time Mike or I tried to establish our position, someone would interrupt with another reason why we were wrong. Linda eventually broke down in full sobs, saying she just wanted to be a young grandmother who could still run around with her grandchildren. Mike finally lost his patience after about 40 minutes of this and raised his voice, something he rarely does. He told his entire family that our reproductive decisions were ours alone, and anyone who couldn't respect that wouldn't be welcome in our future children's lives. He said we had planned to wait 3 to 4 years before trying to conceive, and that timeline wasn't up for family debate or vote. He added that his parents' behavior was making him reconsider how much contact he wanted with them at all. The cafe fell silent. Other patrons were clearly uncomfortable, and a server asked if everything was okay. We decided it was time to leave, but as we stood up, Eleanor grabbed my wrist and told me that if I really loved Mike, I would give him children while she was still alive to meet them. I gently removed her hand and told her I hoped she'd be around to meet her great-grandchildren in a few years, but emotional manipulation wouldn't change our plans. We left with Linda crying dramatically and Tom looking furious. On the drive home, Mike apologized repeatedly for his family's behavior. He was clearly upset and embarrassed, which made me feel guilty even though I knew none of this was my fault. The next day, Linda emailed me several job postings for marketing positions that were, in her words, more family-friendly with less travel. All were significant steps down from my current role. Mike called his mother that evening and told her she was crossing a line and needed to stop. She insisted she was only trying to save our marriage before it even began, claiming she'd seen too many couples divorce because they waited too long to have children and grew apart. Mike told her that if anything would cause problems in our relationship, it would be her interference. The rest of the week was tense. Linda texted both of us multiple times daily, alternating between apologies, guilt trips, and more suggestions about our future. Tom called Mike's cell phone repeatedly until Mike finally blocked him temporarily. Even Jen, who I thought might be more understanding, sent me a long message about how I should be willing to compromise on something as important as family planning. By the weekend, we were exhausted from the drama. My Aunt Diane invited us to stay with her for a few days at her lake house, about 2 hours from the city. We gratefully accepted and spent the weekend far from cell service, hiking and discussing how to move forward. Diane, who never married or had children herself but has a successful therapy practice, reminded me that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. When we returned home, we found a handwritten letter from Linda in our mailbox. She apologized for the scene at the cafe but still insisted that we were making a mistake by waiting to have children. She wrote that she would try to be more understanding but hoped we would reconsider our timeline. It wasn't the complete acknowledgement of our autonomy we had hoped for, but it was something. Mike and I have decided to maintain minimal contact with his family for now. He'll call once a week to check in but won't engage in conversations about our family planning. I'm keeping my distance entirely until they can demonstrate real respect for our choices. Our wedding is still months away, and I'm dreading the planning process if this behavior continues. Mike has suggested eloping, but I don't want his family issues to rob us of the celebration we've been looking forward to. For now, we're taking it one day at a time and focusing on supporting each other. I start my new position next week, and Mike begins residency orientation soon after. At least we'll both be too busy to dwell on the family drama. Update 2: It's been about a month since my last update, and the situation has evolved in ways I never expected. Mike and I have maintained our distance from his family, with him taking occasional calls but keeping conversations brief and superficial. I remained completely no contact, focusing on my new job and getting settled into the position. The travel has been intense but rewarding, and I've already completed successful trips to our London and Tokyo offices. Last weekend, we received an invitation to Linda and Tom's 35th wedding anniversary celebration. Mike felt obligated to make an appearance, and I agreed to go with him for moral support. We planned to stay for the minimum socially acceptable time, congratulate them, have one drink, and leave. The event was at an upscale restaurant with about 50 guests, mostly family and close friends. We arrived intentionally late to minimize our time there. Initially, things were tense but civil. Linda hugged Mike warmly and gave me a stiff nod. Tom shook our hands and thanked us for coming. We thought maybe they had finally gotten the message about respecting our boundaries. That illusion lasted about 30 minutes. After we'd made small talk with some cousins and family friends, I overheard Linda introducing me to her friend from church as her son's fiancé, the one postponing their grandchildren for her career. I excused myself to the restroom to regain my composure, not wanting to cause a scene at their anniversary party despite my anger. What I didn't know was that while I was in the restroom, the situation took a dramatic turn. My Aunt Diane showed up at the party uninvited. I had mentioned the anniversary to her during our weekly call, but never suggested she should attend. Apparently, she decided on her own that she needed to be there. When I returned from the restroom, I found Mike looking simultaneously horrified and impressed. He pulled me aside and whispered that Aunt Diane had arrived and was talking to his parents. We watched from across the room as Diane spoke calmly but intensely to Linda and Tom, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Later, Mike described it as the most elegantly savage takedown he'd ever witnessed. Diane, being a respected family therapist with 30 years of experience, spoke with authority as she explained to Linda and Tom how their behavior was inappropriate and harmful. She cited research about how modern couples benefit from establishing their careers before having children, mentioning statistics about better outcomes for children and lower divorce rates when parents are financially and emotionally ready. She directly addressed their pressure tactics, telling them that their current behavior was the fastest way to ensure they rarely saw their future grandchildren. When Linda tried to defend herself, Diane referenced specific incidents: the ambush at the cafe, the unsolicited fertility clinic appointment, the baby clothes, the timeline, and suggested they seek counseling for their unhealthy attachment and control issues. The room fell silent as everyone pretended not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Diane finished by handing them her business card with the names of 3 colleagues who specialized in family boundary issues written on the back. Then she simply walked over to us, suggested we'd fulfilled our social obligation, and the 3 of us left together. The fallout was immediate and intense. Mike's phone exploded with texts from family members, some outraged at the public humiliation of Linda and Tom on their anniversary, others secretly supportive of us. His sister Jen called him crying, saying Diane had no right to interfere in family matters. His Aunt Barbara, however, texted that she'd been uncomfortable with Linda's obsession with our reproductive choices for months and was glad someone finally said something. Linda and Tom themselves remained uncharacteristically silent for several days. When they finally reached out to Mike, it was with a brief message saying they needed some time and were postponing the weekly family dinners indefinitely. Mike felt torn between relief that the pressure had stopped and concern about the family rift. I felt guilty about Diane's intervention, even though I hadn't asked for it. I called Diane the next day to ask why she'd done it. She was unapologetic, saying that as someone who genuinely cared about me, she couldn't stand by watching Linda and Tom bully us about something so personal. She also revealed that she'd received a concerning call from Linda a week earlier, asking her to help convince me to change my mind about waiting to have children. Instead of telling me about the call, Diane decided to handle it herself. While I appreciate Diane standing up for us, I'm worried about the long-term consequences for Mike's relationship with his family. He says he's fine with the distance for now but admits he's sad about how things have escalated. We've scheduled some sessions with a pre-marriage counselor to discuss healthy ways to handle these family dynamics going forward. For now, things are quiet. Too quiet, possibly. Mike's extended family has taken sides, with most of the older generation supporting Linda and Tom, while his cousins and younger relatives seem to understand our position better. We're focusing on our work and trying not to let the family drama overshadow our engagement. The wedding is still several months away, and we've started discussing whether we should scale it back to avoid more confrontation. I'll update again if anything significant changes, but for now, we're just trying to move forward and hope that eventually, Mike's parents will come to respect our decisions. Update 3. It's been 3 months since what Mike now refers to as Hurricane Diane hit his family, and the aftermath has been surprising in the best possible way. After nearly 6 weeks of minimal contact, Mike received a text from his father asking if he would be willing to meet them for lunch, just Mike, without me. Mike was hesitant but agreed, thinking it might be his chance to finally make them understand our position. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. When Mike came home afterward, he looked emotionally drained but also relieved. According to him, his parents had done some serious reflection following Diane's public confrontation. Tom admitted they had been completely out of line with their behavior. Linda revealed that their obsession with grandchildren began after attending a friend's 40th anniversary party where everyone was showing off photos of grandchildren, and they felt left out. More surprisingly, Linda disclosed her own past fertility struggles. She had difficulty conceiving Mike and his sister, which doctors partly attributed to her waiting until she was 30 to start trying. She needed fertility treatments for both pregnancies. This created an unhealthy obsession that she now recognized she was projecting onto me. She was terrified I would face the same challenges but acknowledged her approach had been completely wrong. The most shocking revelation was that they had actually started seeing a family therapist specializing in boundary issues, one of the professionals Diane had recommended. They had been attending weekly sessions and said they had gained perspective on their controlling behavior. They requested a chance to apologize to me directly, but only if I was comfortable with it. Mike and I discussed it at length, and I agreed to meet them under certain conditions. Diane helped arrange a meeting in a private dining area at a restaurant, where she could be present as a mediator. To my surprise, Linda and Tom offered what seemed like genuine apologies. There were no excuses, no subtle blame, just acknowledgement that their behavior had been driven by fear and control rather than love. They asked for an opportunity to rebuild our relationship based on mutual respect. I explained that would require clear boundaries, no discussion of our family planning unless we initiated it, no criticism of my career choices, and respecting our decisions without commentary. They agreed to these terms without hesitation. Over the following months, they'd actually demonstrated consistent change. Linda sent me a congratulatory gift basket when I successfully completed my first major project at work, with a card that only mentioned my career achievement, not a single hint about babies. Tom has had several conversations with Mike about the challenges of his residency without once mentioning how it would impact our future children. Wedding planning, which I was dreading, has become surprisingly pleasant. Linda asks for our preferences first and supports our vision without trying to take over. She even found a smaller venue that perfectly matched what we wanted after our original choice fell through. In a gesture that genuinely touched me, Linda gave me a vintage family brooch as a welcome gift. She explained it had belonged to her grandmother and she wanted me to have it as a symbol of welcoming me to the family, with no expectations attached. The old Linda would have said something about how I could pass it down to our daughter someday, but she didn't mention anything about future generations. Even Aunt Diane, who was initially skeptical of their change, has been impressed with their consistent efforts. She actually met Linda for coffee last week and reported that she seemed to have genuinely reflected on her behavior. Mike's sister Jen also apologized for her role in the cafe intervention, admitting she had just been parroting what her parents wanted her to say. With the family pressure gone, Mike and I have been able to focus on our actual plans. We've decided to use this limited vacation time during the first 2 years of residency to travel extensively, visiting countries we've always wanted to see before considering children. When we mentioned these plans at a recent family dinner, Linda simply asked which countries we were planning to visit and offered suggestions from her own travels in her 20s. The wedding is now 2 months away, and while I'm still cautious, I'm hopeful that we've turned a corner with Mike's family. I know many of you suggested going no contact permanently, and we were prepared to do that if necessary. But I'm glad we gave them the opportunity to change, especially for Mike's sake. I don't know if they'll maintain this respect for our boundaries forever, particularly when we do eventually decide to have children. I suspect Linda will have to work hard to contain her excitement and not become overbearing again. But for now, we've established a healthier dynamic and both Mike and I feel more secure in our decisions. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support throughout this journey. It meant more than you know to have validation that I wasn't being unreasonable in wanting to establish my career before starting a family. I hope I won't need to post another update, but if Linda and Tom revert to their old ways, I know where to find support.